Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Highruler, and today we're talking about Marvel's Avengers first ever raid, the end of the War for Wakanda expansion. Now, after playing the raid over the course of a 14-hour stream yesterday, I feel like I'm at the point where I could talk about what I like and dislike about the raid and give you guys a breakdown of each section and really kind of break down what I liked and disliked about that section for you guys. Now, with that being said, before I get into any of that, I just want to say if you're interested in the raid, a few things that I really feel like need to be communicated. The first is please have a mic. If you do not have communication in your team, you are not getting this raid done whatsoever. It is not happening. And with that being said, please have a mic. The second thing is make sure you have about 3 hours of allotted time for you to kind of dedicate to this raid. Now, that is a lot of time. I get it. But as people are learning the raid, there are going to be mistakes, there are going to be wipes, and people are still trying to figure this out. So make sure you have the correct amount of time allotted for you to sit down and figure this out with your fire team without you having to leave while you guys are in the middle of the raid, because there is no join in progress, which I'll talk about at the end of this video. And with that being said, if you leave them, they're going to have to start all over again. Now, with that being said, guys, let's get into the video here and start breaking down this raid and what I liked and disliked about it. All right, guys, so as you start the raid, you're going to end up on the outside of the Vibranium Mound. And this, to me, was a great start to the raid. This wasn't anything too crazy, but it gave you a test of the overwhelming numbers that you may face in the raid and the difficulty of the enemies that you are going to face. Now, this section right here, guys, is pretty much, you basically kill all the enemies here, and while you kill all the enemies, the Dora Milaje are breaking down the sound barrier for you to get into the Vibranium Mound. It's all pretty simple. It all kind of starts right here, and the raid is supposed to ramp up, right? So all things considered, what they did here with the opening, pretty standard, but you don't need to do anything crazy to start your raid, right? So I think they did a good job here. The environment, the way it all looks is beautiful, but of course, we've said that about Wakanda before. Everything they've done with Wakanda was so beautiful to look at, and it's nice to finally get to go back to Wakanda with some new content, right? This is why people wanted villain sectors. This is why people wanted repeatable content that actually mattered, because what they do with Wakanda looks so good. And I think even if you're not too interested in the raid, I think the visuals of Wakanda, if you're able to, you should go check it out, because this whole environment that they built with this raid is so good. And we're going to talk about that as we go through each of these sections. What they've done here and built out is breathtakingly beautiful. But with that being said, guys, this section right here, the beginning section, is fair, is pretty fun, but is not anything too crazy. Now let's get into the next section of the raid. Now, the next section of the raid, guys, is the mini boss. So you face the mini boss in the second kind of, I guess, encounter of the raid. Now, this is a pretty standard DPS boss check at this point. The idea is that you DPS the boss goes away, you get the ads, you kill the ads, the boss comes back, right? Nothing crazy here. Once again, it's all about ramping up to, obviously, the finale of the raid. So, in terms of a second encounter within the raid, it's fine. It's not anything too crazy. I'd like to see what the elite version of this encounter is going to do. I feel like they could have done something more, maybe something a little more challenging, but obviously, once again, without doing anything to kind of one up the elite version, depending on what that could be. I think this is all pretty standard, and I don't think anyone here will have a difficult time with this. If you're able to kind of do, I guess, like the hardest custom harm room difficulty, this kind of boss should not give you any sort of difficulty whatsoever. We were able to kind of down it super quick. Obviously, I am playing Hawkeye, so obviously Bag of Tricks goes burr. But I mean, for anyone who's playing any sort of build right now, as long as your build is a competent build and you put some thought into it, the command crawler is not going to give you any sort of difficulty. And for some, that may actually be a negative. But as you get into the raid and as you get into the back half of the raid, I think having the command crawler be kind of easy is not the worst thing in the world, right? So with that being said, guys, this isn't the worst thing in the world. It's not obviously the best thing in the world, but this is the mini boss and it is what it is. Now, obviously, I know a lot of people were expecting like maybe some sort of villain, and of course that was crushed a few weeks ago. But, obviously, if you're looking at the command crawler, it is kind of cool. Obviously, I think a lot of us are kind of sick of fighting robots, but I mean, this is kind of a cooler robot, I guess. So for me, in terms of that, I think it gets a win in that regard, right? So that is what I got to say about the command crawler, guys. It's not the greatest thing. It's not the worst thing. It is still kind of cool, though, right? But the boss fight itself isn't really anything too difficult compared to everything else in the game this far. Now, as you finish the command crawler, you enter this area. Now, as you guys can see, there is a section with switches. There is a section with plates. And the objective here is to get the bubble up before the one-shot mechanic, which you're going to see a lot of this one-shot mechanic later on in the raid. So what you're seeing here, guys, is my Hawkeye going to what I like to call the bottom right. So there are 3 plates that your team needs to step on. It is bottom right, top right, and back left. Now, what you need to do is everyone needs to capture 1 point while your 4th person stands in the middle and gets the switches. Now, this isn't too hard as long as everyone is communicating, right? Now, the way I was doing it with my team is that everyone would go to 1, and then 1 person would be in the center, and we would call out when these would go purple, right? So the progress is yellow, blue, purple. Now, purple is everyone has captured 1. Blue is only you or 1 other person has captured 1, but you're missing the 3rd one. Now, all in all, guys, this isn't too hard. I thought for an opening puzzle, opening mechanic, things that you have to solve with communication, I thought it was pretty fine. You know, as you kind of see later on in the raid itself, you do a lot of these floor mechanics, a lot of these floor kind of plates. But in terms of this one itself, I thought it was pretty fine. You have to do this about 3 times, guys. So, you know, you're going to see a lot of that number 3 as we go through this raid. But if I'm looking at this one, it's not too bad. What I would have been interested to see is could they incorporate a 4th plate somewhere and had your team really scramble with like a rotation around, right? Probably not, because I think the timings were a little tight here. But all in all, I thought this was pretty fun. I thought at times we were very overwhelmed by the enemies, but I think that added a extra layer of the fun to it as well, right? So all in all, guys, I thought this was a very fun first mechanic, very fun first puzzle. And I think honestly, as you see later on in the raid, while yes, you're doing a lot of these floor plates, I think, you know, obviously these are kind of different from what we've been doing, while obviously still retaining some of the sameness of what we've been doing earlier in the game. But all in all, guys, I think this was fun and not too many complaints here with regards to this mechanic. All right, guys, so after you do the floor plates, here's the next part of the raid. Now, this is probably where I'm going to levy probably one of my heaviest criticisms here. And I think this part of the raid, when you're doing the leapfrogging around the rooms, just doesn't really seem fun. This really seems like it's just there to kind of impede your time and progress without really giving you a lot of fun element there, right? Now, I know in other games there's jumpy puzzles and stuff like that, which kind of acts similar to what this is. Now, maybe I would levy the same criticism to those games as well. But with that being said, you know, obviously once you learn the pattern, this isn't going to take you too long. So all in all, my opinion on this may change in a week when everyone knows the pattern and it's bing, bang, boom, and where everyone's through. But, you know, with that being said, I mean, I just didn't see a lot of fun in this, though. You know, once again, maybe in a week, this will not take as long. All in all, guys, you know, this room right here, this section right here, not once again the greatest thing. There really isn't too much to kind of worry about. Though, obviously, once you get into these rooms here, you still can't be damaged by the one-shot mechanic. So there is a little bit of kind of like, oh, crap, you got to really do pay attention to the windows there. But all in all, it's pretty much everyone stand on a plate, make sure you get the pattern right, and move all the way to the end of this hallway. Okay, so once you're at the end of the hallway there, guys, the idea is once again to clear all the enemies out of this area. So you go from a hallway where you're kind of leapfrogging around each other to clearing out all the enemies here in order to activate the switches, which you saw as I was jumping over them. Now, this isn't anything too crazy here, guys, once again. Now, the thing about this area in particular is that I feel like this kind of is like a filler section, right? Now, I can say the same about the leapfrogging area as well. It just feels like filler. And I think that's kind of the issue when it comes to the flow of the raid, right? You go from cool opening area to your mini boss to your first puzzle, then you get filler and then filler again, right? Or if you want to count this as one big filler kind of piece of content within the raid itself. Now, I don't know how you kind of fix that, right? I don't know if you drop maybe like a mini boss here as well. So maybe like a minier boss, right? Or just give something that is going to challenge the players here instead of just like, okay, here's all these kind of trash enemies that you have to clear. I don't know what the fix is for that, but I definitely feel like once you kind of enter this area, the kind of flow of the raid is kind of interrupted just a little bit here. Now, I've played the raid twice through completion. I played it 3 times in total. So that is just kind of my first opinions of it. Maybe let me play it some more and maybe I get a better flow as we're kind of running all the way through it. this could be just kind of those first day vibes where maybe after the fourth or fifth or sixth attempt, I'm looking at this and saying, okay, the quicker we get through this area, the flow actually isn't that interrupted, right? But I definitely felt like in this run in particular, and of course, as you can see here, there's kind of a little bit of a glitch here, but the flow definitely was interrupted just a little bit here. And because of that, I feel like this part really kind of, just I guess lagged for me, I guess is the best word I can use, right? So with that being said, that is this add killing area in order to get to the switches, in order to get to the next area of the raid. All right, so once you do the switches and you make sure you time them all correctly and get into the elevator, you enter the forge area where you have to restart the forge. Now, this is probably where communication is going to be the most dire for your team. I actually really enjoyed this part. So the way we did this was we put one person on top, we put one person on bottom, and we had two people, and we put the Thors in particular here who were flying around in order to kind of hit the corruptive vibranium. Now, I'm going to pause the video here. So the basic breakdown of what this is, guys, I'm going to just rewind it a little bit here. Sorry, because I think this bears mentioning for you guys who are probably going to have a little bit of difficulty here. So right here, you're going to see this area, right? This is a platform that you guys are going to want to be on. You're going to want to send one person right here in order to activate that platform and get the symbols. At the top of the platform, right here, you're going to want to hit the corresponding cylinder to the symbol that is down bottom below in order to kind of activate the sides to get the corrupted vibranium out of the forge. Now, this is a lot to take in your first time. This is definitely going to test your guys' communication as well as your DPS. This is going to be quite a bit for you guys to handle. Now, with that being said, what did I think about this? I thought this was actually kind of fun. Now, depending on the way you look at this, this could be quite a bit of BS, I guess is the best way to put it, right? So down below is actually quite challenging, right? So when I was playing as Cap in my first two times through, I thought it was very challenging kind of holding that bottom area. Now, as you guys can see, I found it quite challenging to hold this top area as Hawkeye, right? So what we found is that having two Thors, or having maybe for you guys a Thor and an Iron Man who are able to fly around in order to kind of, provide support for the top and bottom players is going to be very beneficial for your team. It was very beneficial for us to have those Thors who are able to move around very quickly. Now, this mechanic, guys, this puzzle I thought was very fun, thought it was very challenging, and because of that, I would actually rate this as probably one of my favorite encounters in the raid by far. Now, I know that's going to be quite different from a lot of other people's opinion, but I think this was actually a lot of fun to kind of deal with. Now, once again, you are going to be dealing with that one-shot mechanic, as you guys are going to see and have seen. That red light from Claw is going to shine through the window, and if you were caught in that, you are definitely going to be one-shot by him. So there is quite a bit to take into consideration here when it comes to this encounter specifically, but because of that, I thought there was an element here that was missing from obviously the things prior to this in the raid, but just the game in general, right? Communication, coordination, damage, just knowing where you are, knowing where your teammates are. There is so much there to take into account that I thought this was actually so good and so well built out. Now, once again, I think many people are going to have differing opinions on this, but to me, this is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite encounters in the raid itself. All right, guys, so once you get through with that, you enter into this area where you're having to go to the final area of the raid. Now, honestly, guys, this whole thing can be negated if you're a flyer. You don't have to worry about any of the platforms. You don't have to worry about any of the switches here. If you're a flyer, you basically just fly around. If you're Spider-Man, you basically swing over all of this, right? This whole thing right here seems poorly thought out, I guess, is the best way to put it, right? As you can see, I'm kind of stuck here, and I know there's an element of teamwork that you need here, but it just seems like it's just not well thought out, right? If you have four Thors, you basically just skip this whole thing. You have an Iron Man, a Spider-Man, once again, you skip this whole thing, right? So this is why, if you're in this area, just play a flyer. I guess that's the best advice I can give you, right? It just doesn't seem like a well thought out kind of jump puzzle mechanic or platforming mechanic. It just seems like you can just skip the whole thing, right? So once again, I feel like this is one of those areas where the flow is interrupted of the raid, just like I thought before. This is definitely one of those areas where you're looking at and you're going, okay, the flow definitely was interrupted a little bit here, right? I don't even mind that you have to avoid the one shot mechanic again or anything to do with that. It just feels like it's just not well thought out, and everything to do with this just feels like it's just very much so like interrupting the flow of the raid itself, right? And I think that's the problem, right? You go from this forge kind of encounter where you're having to communicate and coordinate and do all this other stuff into this kind of jumping puzzle, and it's just like, oh, like I just feel like the flow's ruined, I guess, right? So with that being said, guys, you basically just have to watch your platforming. You basically have to communicate with your team in order to make sure you get all these platforms across, to make sure people who aren't flyers are able to get across. And with that being said, that is the whole kind of gist of this one for you guys in the raid. Okay, so once you get through the platforming section, you enter into this area where you're having to defend Shuri in the middle of a room. Now, this is going to be one of the most difficult parts of the raid for me to review, because while it does require coordination, communication, your team knowing what to do, I just didn't think this part was too fun. And you're going to see why as we kind of go through this video. So the whole objective here, as you guys are seeing, is to defend the middle area from the corrupted vibranium and the claw enemies, while someone is going through the outer edges of the room to get a buff in order for you to defeat the corrupted vibranium. It sounds interesting, but the execution of it just seemed lacking. It just didn't seem that great. And because of that, I wonder if there's a way to spice this up, right? Um, it's tough because I really feel like this whole thing, and now this to me is like a tower defense, right? Like it does seem like a tower defense, and I like that. I feel like that's great. I just feel like the way they went about it just doesn't seem the most active, right? Shuri herself plays a role in defeating the corrupted vibranium. So the whole idea is that you get the buff, which is called anti-metal. Now, the idea is when you get anti-metal, you kind of defeat, or I guess defeat, you destroy the corrupted vibranium and you kind of take it all the way down to no health, right? But the problem with corrupted vibranium is that it regenerates. So you're having to kind of defeat and destroy the corrupted vibranium while you have the buff and keep it with no health until the buff runs out for Shuri to do her AoE attack and kind of, solidify the corrupted vibranium there so it doesn't regenerate, right? It seems like that could be done better. That whole mechanic can be refined better, right? And the most interesting thing about it, which I actually like this part, is that each teammate has to be around the original person who got the buff in order to maintain the buff. I think that's cool. So you're not having people who get the buff and then fly off and do each and every single one, right? Because then the whole encounter is done in one instance at that point, right? Or maybe two instances at that point. So I think there's an element here of like, there is something here, but it's lacking that secret sauce in order to kind of make it the best encounter it can be, right? There's potential in this one. I just don't know how to bring about that potential in order to kind of make it the best encounter, right? All in all, it is still fun, but I feel like it can definitely be more fun than what it is, right? Definitely not as good as the Forge encounter, definitely not as good as the floor plates with the bubble encounter, but, it definitely is up there in terms of like, okay, I had some fun with this. Maybe the elite version is going to be better, but without actually knowing what the elite version is going to contain, it's tough to say, right? So that is the corrupted vibranium portion of the raid. Okay, so once you're done that part of the raid, it opens up into the Zawavari kind of team up, I guess is the best thing to say, right? And this feels like the most Marvel thing that Marvel's Avengers has done in a long time, right? So the idea here is that Zawavari is taking it upon himself to join you in taking down Claw. Now, what is happening here is you're actually fighting Big Claw. There was a lot of questions before the raid about, are you actually going to fight Big Claw? Is Big Claw going to make an appearance, right? Are you going to fight him as the Little Claw? Well, yeah, you're fighting him as Big Claw, and I think this was a lot of fun in terms of what to get out of this fight. Now, the whole goal here, guys, is to allow Zawavari to power up in order for him to bring down Claw into your level for you to damage. Now, there's a few different things going on that I still haven't really figured out yet. Now, there's a buff here that you can get called Ancestral Spirit. I thought, based on my raid experience with Stardust, Sonic Photo, and the Brown Bull, that if you kill the echoes within this circle that Zawavari has provided you, that you get that buff. It wasn't the case in this run. I don't know what we did different. I had to go back and review the VOD. If any of you guys know, leave a comment down below because I would love to know what you guys did to get the Ancestral Spirit buff, because it is a damage buff. It is important, and I think people should, obviously help each other in order to make sure they get it as consistently as possible. Now, once again, guys, you'll be once again acquainted with the one-shot mechanic where you have to stand behind the pillars in order to make sure you're not hit by that one-shot mechanic. Now, the reoccurring theme that you guys are seeing in this raid is one-shot mechanic, right? If you guys are, familiar with Super Adaptoid at this point, you are familiar with one-shot mechanics. This is something Crystal Dynamics have leaned on very heavily in their end game experience this far, and I think, honestly, after this raid, I think they should probably move away from a one-shot mechanic, right? I understand at a certain point, and we'll get there, that a one-shot mechanic is very necessary, but there is almost a one-shot mechanic throughout this whole raid almost. And I think it's either a tachyon timer or a one-shot mechanic. Now, don't get me wrong, I would much rather the one-shot mechanic, but it's like, do we have to pick between the two? Really? But all things considered, it is what it is at this point. And this whole fight itself is really fun. And we're going to talk about Big Claw and what to do there. All right. So once he is down on the ground, the idea is at this point, you want to attack the eye. Now, the eye is going to be crit damage all the way. So you want to make sure you go right up to the eye and do as much damage as possible. Now, the idea here is that it will take you 3 times. See, that number 3 is coming back in order for you to get past the Big Claw part. So the idea is you Zawavar charges, you get the head down, you damage the eye, you avoid the blast. As you can see, right when you're done your damage phase, he does the one-shot mechanic, and then basically you start the whole encounter all over again 3 times. And at that point, once you've done that 3 times and his health goes down, he turns into Little Claw. And we're going to have a lot to talk about this Little Claw boss fight. All right, guys, so the way this fight works is that you start on the platform that you fought Claw and Crossbones on. Now, this is kind of where that reuse of that environment comes into play, though obviously there is more to this fight that we're going to talk about that makes use of this whole environment. Now, the way this fight works is that he starts off big, he fires his gun at a platform that you need to dodge, and then from there he throws his sonic cannon down on the middle platform, which allows you to kind of build up that stun meter. So I'm going to pause it right here, guys. One of the things that you're going to have to take into account here, which makes this fight quite a bit of bullshit, is the stun meter. So below his health, there will be a bar that you have to fill up. Now, this bar is filled with damage. Now, what you're going to see is that your damage is actually cut off at the knees here. It is pitiful to look at. You go from doing tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands to maybe 60, 70, 80. Maybe you get lucky, you hit 2,000, right? Now, that is normal, guys. It's not a glitch, and that is just the way they kind of balance this fight. Now, over the course of this fight here, you will have to do that stun damage over and over and over to him. One of the most interesting questions that I've been getting today has been, does intensity work? I don't know, honestly. If any of you guys have tested, kind of high intensity builds with this fight, let me know in the comments below. I would love to know how you guys have been doing this. Now, one of the most interesting things about this fight is that there is kind of a little bit of a glitch involved with it as well that I'm going to highlight. So as you guys see here, you're basically kind of dodging the red kind of rings of death at this point. Now, what I found is that, yes, you can either jump over them or you can dodge through them, which made things a lot easier, though obviously right there it didn't. Now, one of the most frustrating things, though, about this is that at a certain point in time, it just feels like you're not doing any sort of damage whatsoever when it comes to that stun meter. It takes so long to build it up that at some point you're wondering, like, what is even going on? I found that abilities work really well when in terms of building up that meter. I found that when I was doing abilities, it really did seem to fill up faster than I was just doing normal attacks. So maybe take that into consideration when you're doing it. Now, the idea here, guys, I'm going to pause it again, is that if you don't get it all the way to the end, what happens is that he does go big again. Now, when he does go big again, I was actually running into this glitch here with Stardust, the Brown Bull, and Sonic Photo, where he would actually raise his gun, but no animation was coming out in terms of the actual beam of his gun. Now, what I found here, guys, is that if you don't get this white meter all the way to the end and he becomes big again, you have to split up. So this means that 2 people on one platform, 1 on another, and 1 on the far end platform, whichever that is. Because what is going to happen is that he's going to pick an area that he's going to fire his gun. Maybe no beam comes out, but the whole damage calculation is going to take place. And if you're together on that area, all of you are going to die. So, once again, if you don't get that stun meter up, split up, stay away, and hope that all of you or some of you will survive that encounter. Now, if you do get that damage up and you do actually get this stun meter all the way to the end, you get transported to the normal world. The encounter switches gears a little bit. Now, this actually allows you to move into a damage phase against Claw, which I found to be quite all right. Now, this has quite a few mechanics that you need to take care of, including the portals. If you guys don't take the portals out, they will spawn echoes. And at one point, we were pretty much swarmed by echoes. So make sure you guys take out all the portals there. You be very careful about those portals, and you don't allow any sort of echoes to spawn. The less echoes, the better, and the more chance that you get DPSing Claw himself. Now, in order to damage Claw, this means that one person will have to be all the way at the back area of the room. Now, when you are on those top two platforms, the door does open up when you're in the normal world, and you have to go to the back and sit there if you're the person chosen to get the buff. So the way it works is that one person will sit here, get the anti-metal buff that has come back from the corrupted vibranium part, while the other people go and fight Claw. Now, this is probably where I'm going to levy a criticism again, because while 3 people or 2 people in this case get the fight Claw, the other person basically just has to sit there and do nothing. Now, one of the people that I ran the raid with through completion said this was probably one of the most boring parts for them because they never actually got to fight Claw. Now, one of the things I would like to see is hopefully a rotation of people who have to come back here during the elite version, so that not one person is stuck on buff duty and the rest of them actually get to fight Claw and have that fun, right? It just doesn't seem like that's fair to the person who has to be kind of stuck back there. Though I will say, if you are the person that's stuck back there, a Thor works really well, a Hawkeye works fairly decently, probably a Hulk would actually work fairly decently as well, because when you're back there, actually, there's a lot of enemies that will actually swarm you, so anything that can take out a crowd very quickly is probably well needed back there. Though I don't know, for example, obviously unless you're Lejeune, how good a Hulk is going to be throughout the rest of the raid, so take that into consideration. The rest of this fight itself was fine once you finally get a hold of kind of the, I guess, glitch that is happening with Claw not showing the beam. Once you kind of get an idea that at certain points you have to split up and not stick together when it comes to the platform issues, I think you're fine. I don't think this fight was, worse than Super Adaptoid, for example. I think the Super Adaptoid fights, I think a lot of people are going to ask, is this better than the ULT? The answer is yes, this is actually better than the ULT. The Super Adaptoid fight, for anyone who's played it, knows that it just throws a bunch of bullshit at you and expects you to dodge and, kind of run everywhere. And really, you run around like a, chicken with his head cut off, where this still allows you a little bit of coordination there and time to kind of plan out what you want to do, right? Whether you're in the sound world and you have to take into account all the echoes and make sure you kind of damage Claw and make sure you take account of when Claw goes big, or you're in the normal world and you take, account of the portals and the echoes and obviously the buff and make sure you get enough damage into Claw. I think actually this is well thought out. I just think that there's certain points in this fight that probably could be refined in terms of allowing certain players, more agency over actually fighting Claw. I think once again, that 4th player who is in the back is going to look at this fight and say, wow, I didn't get to fight Claw. And I think for that, that's probably going to be an issue. Though overall, the fight itself was very good. I actually enjoyed this part a lot. Though once again, they just need to kind of refine some things and work on it for the next encounter. Though once again, if the elite version has a rotation of players that have to go through there, this whole thing is probably solved at that point, right? Now, with that being said, guys, no raid is complete without the rewards. So with that being said, let's talk about the raid rewards and what you should expect from those. I'm going to look at the Captain America rewards that I got completing the raid and just kind of give you an overview of my thoughts. Now, obviously, as kind of a baseline, whenever people look at perks in Avengers, there's obviously like the Holy Trinity, right? It's damage buff, tachyon surge, Jarvis barrier. For the most part, Jarvis barrier kind of floats in and out depending on the build, but damage buff and tachyon surge for sure, right? So when I'm looking at gear pieces like this, I'm not even going to worry about the melee piece right now, but let's go to the chest piece, right? So the chest piece that I have right now is a reactive buff chest plate, right? So it's, you take damage, you get a damage buff, right? Now, you look at the stats, resolve, valor, precision, right? 52, 55, 52, right? Not bad, not great, but not bad, right? It does what it needs to do. Now, let's look at the piece that I got. Discordant battle plate, right? So 70 might, 69 valor, 72 precision, right? So the perks are 25% or negative 25% damage reduction from any sonic attacks. Now, okay, sure. Reverberation Reckoning, 25% additional impact bonus for any attack against an enemy afflicted with the vibranium status effect. Okay, something is there, and I'll talk about it in a second. Granting ground. While sending the sonic conduit buff to other heroes, the sender is less likely to be staggered. Okay, whatever. Now here's the issue, right? So I really wanted to play around with the Reverberation Reckoning perk, right? I thought, okay, that's a kind of a cool perk, right? Because if you guys didn't know, my gear piece for my Captain America is the Range Spike Reverberation Resonator, right? It seems like a match made in heaven. The problem is that by taking this chest piece off, is I'm losing damage buff. Damage buff is so good at this point, right? So it seems like my option is at this point to take this piece off actually and try to get a targeted buff with vibranium. But the problem is that doesn't exist. So where does that leave me, right? That leaves me without a targeted buff. That leaves me without a damage buff. And that leaves me not picking this item, right? And I understand, of course, these gear pieces are supposed to be about exploration and teamwork and coordination, but the best coordination is damage. If you're able to do a lot of damage, your team's really going to like you. If you're able to tank a lot of damage, your team's going to like you. And I feel like these pieces don't address that situation, right? I always felt like, and maybe this can be echoed elsewhere, is that damage buff needed to be nerfed. I'm going to say it, guys, because at this point in time, damage buff is so strong that even if I wanted to mess around with this gear piece and kind of do, a vibranium kind of, build at that point, I'm losing out on so much damage that I almost just kind of nerf myself for no reason, right? And I think what you're going to see over the course of the next few weeks is that maybe these gear pieces aren't the greatest at replacing the pure damage that we have this far, but maybe they introduce fun playstyles, right? And if you're into fun playstyles, yeah, might be all right. If you're into kind of min-maxing your character as best as you can, these gear pieces probably don't do that in a way that's going to be very meaningful for that 1% of players, right? And I think the problem is that your 1% of players are going to be running this raid. And if these gear pieces aren't tailored to that 1% of players who are trying to do that min-maxing, are these pieces really going to be appreciated the way you may want them to be appreciated at that point? And I think that's the question that Crystal Dynamics need to ask themselves when it comes to the gear pieces, right? Maybe there's pieces with these RNG gear perks that really could kind of, flesh out these characters in a meaningful way. So maybe there's pieces out there that maybe on the range piece, there is a damage buff somewhere. Yeah, maybe at that point you do look at that and say, okay, let's try it out, right? But I think the problem is that you have so many good perks, and I say so many, but two, and then maybe one falling shortly behind it, that kind of locking you out of those perks is really kind of just nerfing your character. And I think that's the problem with these gear pieces. But with that being said, guys, that is it for the end of the raid review video. That is my full breakdown and my thoughts of everything to do with the raid. That can change, obviously, over the next few days, over the next few weeks. So stick tuned to the channel to find out what I think about the raid as I play more, as I go through with other characters. And if you guys are interested in more Marvel's Avengers videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel and make sure you come join me Thursday for more live streams of the raid and ulti coverage. And I can't wait to see you there. Take care of yourselves, guys. Take care of the people around you. Enjoy the rest of your day and night. And I can't wait to see you next time here. Later, guys.